Sometimes a single stolen document can alter the course of history. Even more surprising is when a small nation becomes the unlikely broker between two superpowers, using charm and cunning to rewrite the rules of the global game. This is the astonishing true story of how a charismatic Polish journalist, a secret Soviet report, and a fateful meeting in a restroom unraveled the myth of an all-powerful intelligence service and reshaped the world order. The tale begins in the tense political winter of 1956, but the ripples of these events would be felt for decades to come. The cold Moscow winter of late February 1956 saw dramatic temperature swings, plunging from -10 to -27 degrees. Inside the halls of the Soviet government, an even greater upheaval was being prepared. The 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was a lengthy affair, covering topics from ideology to industrial policy. Yet it was the final day, February 25th, that would etch itself into history. Early that morning, Nikita Khrushchev gathered a select group of delegates for a closed session. He ascended the podium and delivered a secret report on the cult of personality and its consequences. In essence, he detonated an informational and ideological bomb. It had been only 3 years since the death of Joseph Stalin, and now Khrushchev spoke openly of the brutal purges, the misuse of terms like enemy of the people, and the exaggerated role attributed to Stalin during World War II. The report was a systematic dismantling of the personality cult that had surrounded the late leader. As historian and future politician Alexander Yakovlev, then a witness, later recalled, a profound silence filled the hall. There was no creaking of chairs, no coughing, no whispering. No one dared look at each other, whether from shock, confusion, or fear. The depth of the shock was unimaginable. No discussion followed the report. Unanimously, it was decided not to publish it openly. This was, in part, due to the awkward position it put the leadership in. Khrushchev and nearly everyone present had been complicit in the system they were now criticizing. The report was classified as top secret. However, leaders of communist parties in socialist bloc countries were briefed on its contents, creating an international conspiracy of sorts to expose the cult of personality. Then, on June 5th of that same year, 3 months after the Congress, the full text was published by the New York Times and the Washington Post. This is where our central figure, Victor Graevsky, steps onto the world stage. To understand him, we must go back to the 1920s in Krakow, a bustling ancient city and former capital of Poland, home to a large Jewish community. There, in 1925, a boy named Victor Spielman was born into a Jewish family. His childhood was ordinary: school, synagogue, helping his parents. Everything changed on September 1st, 1939, with the Nazi invasion of Poland, followed by the Soviet invasion from the east 17 days later. Amid this tragedy, Victor's lucky star seemed to shine. His family managed to avoid the immediate horrors of the occupation and partition by fleeing to Lvov. Later, they were relocated as special settlers to Siberia. Victor thus finished his schooling in the Soviet Union, a crucial detail that made Russian a second native language for him. After World War II, his parents and sister repatriated to the newly founded state of Israel. Victor, however, decided to return to Poland, settling not in Krakow but in Warsaw. Ambitious, sharp, and charming, he pursued a degree in journalism and political science, and as a necessary step for any career, joined the Communist Party. To avoid standing out with his obviously Jewish surname, party comrades strongly recommended he change it. With characteristic self-irony, Victor did not so much change it as translate it. Spielman in Yiddish means the same as Graevsky in Polish, player or someone who plays games. Spielman became Graevsky. This playful, almost gamesome spirit would define his entire life. After graduating, Graevsky's career was meteoric. He was invited to work for the Polish press agency, PAP. His talent, perseverance, and charm propelled him swiftly to the position of chief editor of the news department covering the Soviet Union and Eastern European socialist states. All this in less than a decade since his return. Life was excellent. Then, as drama dictates, came difficult news. His father in Israel had fallen gravely ill. Miraculously, thanks to his connections, Graevsky was granted permission to travel to Israel to visit him. Israel in 1955 was a country only 7 years old. Archival footage from that year's Independence Day parade reveals a nation in its military infancy. Soldiers and men marched, followed by women soldiers. Balconies and rooftops were packed with cheering crowds. Flags were everywhere, and a festive, proud atmosphere was palpable even in black and white. Tanks and armored vehicles rolled by, and aircraft flew overhead, a public display of the young state's determination to secure its hard-won independence. The memory of those who fought for that independence was and remains sacred. Victor Graevsky, a journalist trained to observe and analyze, took it all in. He perceived the vibrant, chaotic democracy at work. The political pendulum was swinging wildly. Until autumn, the cautious diplomat Moshe Sharett was in charge. Then David Ben-Gurion returned, adopting a harder line. On every border there was daily tension. Raids from the Egyptian-controlled Gaza Strip in the south, Syrian provocations near the Sea of Galilee in the north. In the fall, new clashes erupted in the desert. Most alarmingly, since September, the Czech arms deal had been rattling the region, with Egypt receiving a massive shipment of Soviet weaponry via Prague. Israel responded by accelerating its own arms procurement and strengthening ties with France. The military hardware on parade was not just for show, it was public diplomacy. Daily life was also a whirlwind. Food rationing had ended just a couple of years prior. While supplies were still tight, construction was everywhere. Ports were noisy, work was frantic. Buses from the Egged Company, now one of the largest transit cooperatives in the world, rolled out to new neighborhoods. In development towns, tents were transforming into streets, schools, and workshops. The streets echoed with Polish, Russian, Hungarian, Romanian, Arabic, Yiddish, and the newly revived Hebrew, being rapidly learned in language schools called ulpans. New newspapers in various languages gave immigrants a vital connection. Ministers argued publicly. The army paraded openly. This was a nation of people who had survived war and deprivation, but had a plan for tomorrow. This was the Israel Victor Graevsky encountered in late 1955. For a man with a journalist's instincts, it was intoxicating. Material for stories was on every corner, and adventures seemed to seek him out. It was most likely during this visit that Graevsky made his first contact with Israeli intelligence. The word recruited does not quite fit. He fell in love with the small, proud, noisy country and was ready to stay. And if you are in love, how can you not help the object of your affection? Thus, Graevsky received the operational pseudonym David and returned to Poland. Why go back? First, he wanted to do things properly. Victor Graevsky, now David, returned to Poland as such an asset. His mission was clear: cultivate as many useful contacts as possible in the upper echelons of power. The journalist Graevsky reinterpreted this brilliantly. Why bother with the bosses? They had assistants. The secretaries in the Central Committee of the Polish Communist Party often knew more than the committee members themselves. The charming Graevsky, who gifted imported chocolates, presented perfumes, and accidentally dropped packets of condoms from his pocket, was in his element. The Mossad was guaranteed a wealth of information. Now we return to the start of our story, to the 20th Congress, where Khrushchev delivered his earth-shattering speech. The head of the Polish Communist Party, Bolesław Bierut, was present and apparently so affected by what he heard that he fell ill with influenza and pneumonia a few weeks later. On the night of March 12th, he suffered a fatal heart attack. The party banner was taken up by Edward Ochab. If Bierut was a symbol of local Stalinism, Ochab was a compromise figure for a party in transition. Under him, the political thaw accelerated. Yet he also approved the harsh suppression of the Poznan protests in June, sparked by low wages. On the desks of the Central Committee Secretariat during these weeks lay folders containing materials from the 20th Congress. Documents would leave secure safes to be read, and then returned with a signature. It was early on an April morning in 1956 when our hero climbed the steps of the Central Committee building in Warsaw. Security was tight with multiple checkpoints, but Graevsky was a familiar, successful journalist. His documents were rarely checked. Everyone knew where he was going: to see Lucia Baranowska, an assistant to the first secretary of the Polish Communist Party. As Graevsky later recounted, Lucia was married, but it was not a happy marriage. And here he was, a charming star with gifts. Who could resist? On the desk of his charming companion, David saw a folder stamped "Top Secret," which she was tasked with retyping and annotating. Graevsky had not only a reporter's instincts, but also the Mossad and the promise of a life in the promised land behind him. This was a gift. He would later present this story in interviews as a fortunate accident. He saw the document, asked to read it, took it to the Israeli embassy, they photographed it, and he returned it. But let us consider the reality. Imagine you accidentally come into possession of a world-altering document. You have mere hours. As Lucia reportedly told him, it had to be back in the safe by 4 in the afternoon. Do you just casually walk into an embassy? It is more likely Graevsky knew exactly what to do. Perhaps the Khrushchev report truly fell into his lap by chance, but his subsequent actions were precise. David asked Lucia if he could read it, rolled up the document, and placed it in his inner coat pocket. He passed the security posts without issue, as everyone knew him, and went straight to the Israeli embassy. There, he was expected by a man named Yakov Barmer, who had likely helped Victor secure the visit to his sick father. Regarding human reactions, Graevsky probably did not lie. "I understood I was holding something like an atomic bomb," he said years later, adding about Barmer's reaction. "He turned pale, red, then black." The diplomatic official meticulously photographed every page and returned the document. Graevsky, as promised, returned the secret report by 4 o'clock, compromising no one. What followed was straight from a spy novel. Yakov Barmer left the embassy, needing to get to Vienna as fast as possible, over 600 kilometers away by car or train. A special flight to Israel awaited him there. In Jerusalem, they eagerly anticipated the document every intelligence agency in the world sought: the paper that changed the rules on 1/6 of the Earth's landmass. Now on microfilm, it was in the hands of a diplomatic courier. The document, acquired by the charmed and lucky Saiyan David, who was in love with Israel. The film was developed and printed. The secret Khrushchev report on the cult of personality landed on David Ben-Gurion's desk. One of Israel's founding fathers was skeptical. Was it genuine or a forgery? He was off by 30 years, but the sentiment was clear. A decision had to be made. This was an atomic bomb of information. The Soviet Union was not publicizing it, while the world was desperate to know what Khrushchev had said. Rumors were one thing. The actual text, with its precise phrasing, emphasis, and official stamps, was another. Its value was undeniable. But now David Ben-Gurion faced a dilemma. The USSR was a powerful global player. Openly antagonizing them was premature. Yet the young state of Israel was short on funds. Ben-Gurion made a Solomonic decision: offer the document to American intelligence. Through back channels, Israel contacted CIA Director Alan Dulles. A plan was quickly formed on how to use the report, though it was thoroughly authenticated first. Jerusalem received a significant sum, reportedly $1 to $1.5 million, a fortune in 1956. America received a weapon Stalin himself might have called stronger than Goethe's Faust, the actual report. Everyone won. Israel gained funds, avoided a direct clash with the Soviets, did a favor for America, and subtly demonstrated its capabilities. As Khrushchev himself might have said, they showed their teeth. It was after this incident that the CIA began to take Mossad and Shin Bet seriously. Graevsky earned credit, a kiss from Lucia, and the prospect of a happy life in his beloved Israel. The United States got banner headlines. On June 5, 1956, the full text appeared simultaneously in the New York Times and Washington Post, then ricocheted around the globe. The secret document was secret no more. The Kremlin responded on June 30th with a Central Committee resolution on overcoming the cult of personality, a corrected version of the initial report meant to reframe the narrative. The cult was condemned, but the system remained. However, the initiative had been seized. The world now discussed the original text, not rumors. Another consequence emerged 2 years later when Poland expelled Yakov Barmer for alleged systematic attempts to recruit citizens. The ripples from that April day were still spreading. In early 1957, Victor Graevsky, as planned, made a aliyah to Israel. He repatriated officially, with all documents in order. In Israel, he was provided an apartment in Tel Aviv and a prestigious position at Kol Yisrael, the national radio broadcaster. Yet he remained a new immigrant and needed to master the language. He enrolled in an Ulpan, a Hebrew language school. Learning Hebrew as an adult was challenging. Writing right to left, vowels represented by dots and dashes not used in most adult texts, letters that changed sound. It was interesting but difficult. During breaks, students would have tea, smoke, or use the restroom. It was during one such break in the school restroom that a fellow student struck up a casual conversation in Russian, unsurprising, as many students spoke it. The setting was odd, but where else could one chat privately? Victor politely engaged, but with each probing question from his classmate, his eyebrows crept higher. He was experienced enough to recognize an attempt at recruitment. Yet his very experience made it hard to believe. He was furious. Was this some cheap loyalty test by his own side? He cut the lesson short for an urgent meeting with his Mossad handler. There was likely a heated exchange. "What are you doing? I brought you that document." The Mossad handler apologized, suggesting someone might have acted overzealously. "Let's contact Shin Bet," Graevsky insisted. Shin Bet was contacted, and soon the intelligence officer's eyebrows were rising. No Israeli agency had authorized such a check. This was a real KGB officer attempting to recruit Graevsky in a school bathroom. The target selection made sense. He knew languages, had been a party member, and had a successful career in Israel with good connections. He would have been a valuable asset. The all-seeing eye of the KGB, it seemed, had missed his previous work as David. They had chosen the wrong man to recruit. A few days later, the fellow student reappeared at the Ulpan. The pitch was soft. They were experienced people, understood the rules, no politics, just information, reasonable compensation. Victor played his part as instructed, promising nothing but not closing the door. They arranged an unofficial meeting in a public place. That evening, Graevsky delivered a detailed report to his handlers. Time, place, exact words, suggested routes. Ahead lay a controlled meeting and tons of disinformation. The first meeting with the new Soviet handler, under the operation codenamed Mockingbird, was set near the Ulpan. It was a leisurely conversation about the weather and nature, with careful, probing questions not about secrets but about moods, who talked to whom, whispers on the airwaves. The approach was professional. Victor masterfully played his legend, a journalist with many contacts and a better ear for gossip than most, which was true. Only now his gossip was carefully controlled. David was even assigned a security detail from the best of Israel's special forces. Jerusalem could scarcely believe the KGB's recruitment attempt was a coincidence. Perhaps they knew who he was and planned to abduct him. After the meeting, a full debriefing with Shin Bet specialists analyzed every word and gesture. The conclusions were simple and unsettling. This was a genuine KGB officer. From the description, it became clear Graevsky had been chatting with Valery Sachi, the trade attaché at the Soviet embassy, and concurrently, the KGB resident for the Middle East. This was a big fish, though it was unclear who had hooked whom. From that moment, the dialogue became a controlled game. The rules were strange but effective. To live inside the enemy's trust, you sometimes had to feed them truth, small, harmless snippets of information that would become public tomorrow anyway. Editorial topics, reception gossip, non-sensitive comments. Everything else was tailored. Gradually, a plan of seeding began. This involved prepared phrases carefully woven into conversation, each detail plausible, leading the listener to the desired conclusion. Sometimes it was neutral information to build trust. Sometimes it was disinformation crafted to pass fact-checking, but lead Moscow where Jerusalem wanted. Victor worked not on inspiration but on schedule. Meetings were in public spaces, cafes, train stations, sometimes gray zones with fewer eyes. Conversations were brief but regular, followed by a full report. If his legend needed adjusting, explaining where he heard something, making it sound natural for a journalist, it was done. Operation Mockingbird was a success. So much useful misinformation crossed the Iron Curtain that, when Sachi was eventually recalled, he introduced David to his replacement, Victor Kalayev, and much of the Soviet residency. The work of identifying intelligence officers on the other side of the invisible front progressed well. Then, Graevsky was given a task that, upon its successful and ironically truthful completion, would arguably save his country. For 10 years, Graevsky, Mossad and Shin Bet had been leading the Soviet State Security Committee, the KGB, by the nose. But by May 1967, the international situation was at a boiling point. Tension was extreme on all Israeli borders. Such rhetoric about throwing Jews into the sea was constant from mid-May onward. The chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization, Ahmed Shukeri, echoed that any Jews surviving the coming war, which he was sure the Arabs would win, could live in Palestine, though he doubted many would survive. In this climate, Egypt moved troops into the Sinai, demanded UN peacekeepers withdraw, and declared a blockade of the Straits of Turin, cutting off Israel's access from Eilat to the Indian Ocean, a vital trade route. For Israel, this was a casus belli. Despite the imminent threat, Prime Minister Levi Eshkol was uncertain if the small nation could withstand such powerful adversaries. Losing was not an option. It was a war of annihilation. An idea was formed. Eshkol turned to the intelligence services. You have a channel to supply information to the Soviet Union. It was understood that without Moscow's tacit approval, a full-scale war might not begin, as Egypt's military might was largely Soviet-supplied. The plan was for their man to pass a warning that tiny Israel would preemptively strike the Arab giants, say, on June 5th at 7:45 in the morning. The idea was that such a bold claim might force the other side to reconsider and dial back the tension, allowing diplomacy a chance. The informant was pleased, tapping the information back to center. In the Kremlin, they dismissed it. Nonsense. Disinformation. Where would Israel get the nerve? Besides, similar tidbits were coming from Western sources. Such unanimity surely meant it was a trick. They deceived you, Comrade Graevsky, and they prepared to wipe the promised land off the map. David reported the feedback. They don't believe it. Very well. June 5, 1967 arrived. Monday, 7:45 in the morning. Israeli aircraft took off from bases across the country. Within 20 minutes, the Egyptian Air Force was virtually destroyed on the ground. Nearly 300 aircraft were lost. The Egyptian army was thrown into chaos. Jordan and Syria soon joined the war. Within a day, Israeli forces advanced toward the Suez Canal. In 2 days, they took East Jerusalem. In 6, the Golan Heights. The 6-day war lasted less than a week but forever changed the Middle East and the world map. The victorious June did not end his work, it complicated it. The channel remained open, carefully maintained. Victor worked in his usual rhythm: radio, meetings, reports. Externally, a journalist with good sources. Internally, a controlled source of information. Here is how it looked in practice, without cinematic romance. For providing the precise date and time of the war's start, Moscow decided to be generous. They awarded him the Order of Lenin, the highest honor of the Soviet Union. A paradox worthy of its own book. The KGB was decorating a man who, from their perspective, had saved the honor of Soviet intelligence, while in reality, he had exposed its incompetence on the world stage. The CIA was aware of these leaks of pseudo-valuable information, but this was only the beginning of the farce. Moscow decided they had a true genius in Israel, an agent so reliable he could be trusted to recruit other promising sources. Then came a proposal that even veteran Shin Bet and Mossad officers found hard to believe at first. The KGB proposed that David himself become the resident of Soviet intelligence in Israel, with his own agent network, a direct channel to Moscow, and access to foreign embassies and military officers. In Israel, the joke stopped. Dossiers were scrutinized under a magnifying glass. Could he have been exposed? This simply could not be true, but it was. A unique opportunity not to be missed began a game that entered Israeli intelligence history as one of the most refined psychological deceptions. For the next several years, until 1971, Graevsky, under the control of Shin Bet and Mossad, gradually infiltrated over 50 agents into the ranks of Soviet intelligence. On paper, they were KGB assets. In reality, they worked for Israel. Some were in Israel itself, in press offices, research institutes, and consulates. Others were in Europe, South America, and Africa. Their legends were flawless. Diaspora specialists, engineers, journalists, even diplomats. Moscow was confident it controlled a powerful network. In reality, it received exactly what Jerusalem wanted it to receive. During this time, tons of paper, reports, summaries, and transcripts flowed from Israel to Moscow. Almost everyone contained carefully crafted disinformation, credible data on non-existent American bases, secret IDF plans invented in a radio station office. Sometimes, for authenticity, Mossad staged little performances, fake meetings, photo-op operations, wiretapped conversations that were actually scripted. Moscow believed everything, afraid of stumbling again as they had with the Six-Day War intelligence. By mid-Minus 1971, Graevsky himself realized the joke had gone on too long. Any mistake could blow the entire network and cause an international scandal. David asked to be extracted. Israel agreed. It was time. He was withdrawn under a plausible pretext, supposedly moving to another job. But Soviet intelligence was not entirely naive. They found another successful candidate to fill the vacancy. He was charming, hardworking, well-connected, and also a Mossad agent. How they stepped on the same rake a second time remains a mystery. He led Soviet intelligence against itself almost until 1982. While Moscow wrote victorious reports about deep penetration of Israeli structures, Jerusalem read them over morning coffee. From 1965 to 1982, the primary export from Israel to Moscow was disinformation, all under the control of men Moscow considered its best agents. The story of the Mockingbird and its sequel seriously undermined faith in the infallibility of the Soviet security services. In Israel and the US, they laughed about it, but with respect for the operation's scale. Within the USSR itself, doubts began to creep in. If even their most reliable source was a trap, what about all the others? This became one of the small cracks in the giant facade called the infallible KGB. Western intelligence sensed the colossus had feet of clay and began to act more aggressively. CIA operations in Eastern Europe, psychological campaigns, interference in Moscow's African and Middle Eastern projects. Each new KGB failure was seen as inevitable. This overconfidence in their own invincibility ultimately became a factor in the Soviet Union's dissolution. As for David, Victor Graevsky, he lived a long and comfortable life in Israel. He wrote articles, consulted journalists, and occasionally lectured on intelligence history. Moscow never realized the man they trusted for decades had been leading them astray. The Soviet embassy even privately invited him to Moscow to receive a high state award. He refused. On September 28, 2007, 3 weeks before his death, he received a medal for contribution to state security from the director of Shin Bet. It was official recognition, but more like a quiet thank you among professionals. Victor Graevsky passed away on October 18th of that year, but this story should not end on that note. In the biographies of such undeniably significant figures, there are brief episodes that prove nothing yet perfectly explain the character of their luck. In one television interview, Graevsky recalled an almost improbable scene from his youth, improbable in its confluence of circumstances for ordinary people. Young Graevsky loved hiking in the mountains. Whenever he had free time, he would pack a rucksack and head to Zakopane, Poland's southernmost city at the foot of the high Tatras. Once, Victor and Korolik were paired together and sent to scout a dangerous climb for the group. An 800-meter ascent Graevsky later recalled as not terribly difficult but dangerous. Their lives depended on each other on the rope. Had Korolik's hand slipped, the world might have been very different. Khrushchev's secret report might have remained secret. The Six-Day War might have cost Israel a far higher price. The KGB's aura of omnipotence might have persisted for years longer, and the Soviet Union might have endured longer. Had Victor's hand slipped, then in October 1978, the first non-Italian pope in centuries, the man who would become the canonized John Paul II, Karol Joseph Wojtyla in the world, might never have ascended to the throne of Vatican City. Years later, Korolik did not forget his climbing partner and sent a Vatican medal to Victor in Israel. If you found these intertwined tales of espionage, history, and bizarre coincidence fascinating, please show your support. Liking this video helps others discover these incredible true stories. Subscribing ensures you do not miss our deep dives into the hidden events that shaped our world. And sharing this story with friends and fellow history enthusiasts keeps the conversation going. Your engagement is what allows us to continue uncovering and presenting these remarkable narratives. Thank you for watching. The Six-Day War might have cost Israel a far higher price. The KGB's aura of omnipotence might have persisted for years longer, and the Soviet Union might have endured longer. Had Victor's hand slipped, then in October 1978, the first non-Italian pope in centuries, the man who would become the canonized John Paul II, Karol Joseph Wojtyla in the world, might never have ascended to the throne of Vatican City. Years later, Korolik did not forget his climbing partner and sent a Vatican medal to Victor in Israel. If you found these intertwined tales of espionage, history, and bizarre coincidence fascinating, please show your support. Liking this video helps others discover these incredible true stories. Subscribing ensures you do not miss our deep dives into the hidden events that shaped our world. And sharing this story with friends and fellow history enthusiasts keeps the conversation going. Your engagement is what allows us to continue uncovering and presenting these remarkable narratives. Thank you for watching.